Bang. Okay. All right. Is this sharing properly?
Yes, you look good.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's hit the right buttons. Boom, wonderful. Okay, so yes, I am Matthew Madison Rowe, and the kind of overarching theme of my work for the past 10 years has been this idea of the beauty of broken things. Um, So this all kind of started back in 2015. I had my first gallery show in Santa Fe. A friend of mine, Wade Wilson, had a gallery there at the time, and another mutual friend of ours managed to talk him into giving us a show, even though we kind of had no idea what we were doing. So this was a quick little pop-up, and it was far long enough ago that I didn't have a lot of great pictures. So these are the only ones I was able to find from that first show. So it's always kind of nice when things the chronology like works out. So this was about 10 years ago I had this. And in here you can see, let's see if this little laser pointer thing works. Haha, there we go. This little piece right here. Um, we have a close-up of it here. But while I was making this, this is a white wooden board with a grid of ceramic tiles affixed to it. And while I was firing these, one of them cracked. And that crack was just the coolest thing for me. And became the centerpiece of this piece and really kind of sparked everything that I'm working on still to this day and a lot of my works in the past. And so, also, an important bit of context here is while I was working at the gallery, I think it was about 2012, um, we got the estate of Raymond Johnson. And if you don't know who Raymond Johnson is, he was one of the founding members of the Transcendental Painting Group in New Mexico back in 1938. And he worked at UNM from 1934 till 1950 when he retired, became professor emeritus, and they actually built the Johnson Gallery on campus. Where he continued to live, curate shows. It was a gallery and also his studio, and he lived at that space on the UNM campus until he passed away in 1982. And his work is fantastic. It's abstract, geometric abstraction mostly. And so it was about 2012 I started seeing these geometric abstractions, and it greatly influenced my artistic expression. Um, so here, just kind of playing with a little bit of geometry and clay. And at the time, too, I was really playing with this idea of challenging where in a gallery space ceramics exists. Of course, typically ceramics is kind of relegated to being on any flat surface or in your cupboard. And me being in a gallery looking at all these paintings, I wanted my work to be alongside paintings. And so I started making these wall relief pieces around the same time, 2014, 2015. And I had a very small kiln in my studio, and I wanted to make things that were big, that would actually stand up alongside some of these great paintings. So in pursuing that, I ended up having to think modularly. So at first, I was taking slabs and cutting them into smaller pieces, firing it and then reassembling it on a wood background. And as we saw in that first one, the cracked piece, as I was firing some of these, they started cracking and breaking. And I started to recognize that these cracks actually looked more interesting than the pieces I was intentionally trying to make. So this little triptych here, each one of these is about 4 inches by 4 inches. This one um, really sparked this idea of the beauty of broken things. This was all completely accidental. I think I actually ended up accidentally dropping these three tiles and saw them on the ground and was just like, that is awesome. I could never recreate that. And I've tried, and we'll see that in some later pieces. And these ones just worked out perfectly. And so these were on display in that show, that 2015 show, and they were the only things that I sold out of that show. So it really kind of changed my perspective on my own work when the broken pieces were the kind of the most aesthetically attractive and the most interesting things that I was making. So in that, I started playing around with trying to combine geometric abstraction and slab-built clay work. Also, this time I was taking impressionism very literally and literally impressing different materials and found objects into clay, cutting it apart, and then mounting it on wood and hanging it on the wall. So this is after that show, 2016, which then led to pieces like this, where I was kind of playing with this altar-like form, building out wood on top and bottom of these panels, and attaching these geometric carved ceramic reliefs onto them. Um, so this is actually 2018. I had my first solo show on Canyon Road in Santa Fe. It was a big deal, and this was part of a triptych, this one and this piece as well that I had made for that. Somehow I managed to not have pictures of the third one. But you can see here with the combination of actual broken slabs, cut apart slabs, and then incised geometry on top of them. And eventually I got into different finishes on the wood, but I always really liked the interplay between the wood grain and then the broken clay. So here I was finally able to get some large pieces while still having a relatively small kiln at my studio at home. And I was doing a lot more kind of mixed media wood constructions at the time. So the ceramic element here is the circular forms in the background that are framed out with different pieces of wood and playing with some low fire metallic glazes. Um, and after making these, which I really like aesthetically, these ones in the next this series, which again I somehow put the whole show together and didn't actually get images before I hung the show. So this is just what I had from an old phone shot from many years ago. This is just the negative space from actually making these pieces. So just, trying to be economic working in the studio. Um, but after making these, like these were actually the kind of the star of the show, stole the whole show, and they were like the least ceramic pieces out of everything that I had made. And I'm like, I like working with clay. I don't really like working with wood. So I pivoted away from this, even though everybody really loved these pieces. And it was actually just earlier today. It was wonderful putting this whole presentation together because I got to review some old work and sparked some new ideas on how to incorporate this aesthetic into what I'm working on now. And again, the little square tiles are ceramic, and this is a low fire crawl glaze that I was playing with at the time. And also playing with some action painting with underglazes and then breaking the pieces as well. And then creating kind of a full wall installation out of these broken tiles. And this was a ton of work to put together, and yet somehow, because I was intentionally trying to make them broken, they didn't quite have that same aesthetic as that first triptych that I was able to put together. But this still was moving in this direction of making things and the the goal of making them being to break them. And so these were a really good step forward for me and was leading into some more elaborate pieces like this, which is what I was doing in 2019, where the whole background was broken. And this was a very much a challenge to get all the way through the kiln without losing any pieces and then putting it back together. Again, like I've made a ton of these over the years, but it's something I'm moving away from because it turned it was less actually working in clay and working in a manner that I really enjoyed. And basically, I was just creating jigsaw puzzles for myself, which just gave me a huge headache. And the adhesive that I was using was very toxic. So a lot of hours with a respirator on. using tweezers trying to get everything together and perfectly aligned. But still really pushing my boundaries a lot with these pieces and still challenging that idea of where does clay exist in a gallery space. Um, and a few more kind of minimal expressions of that. So again, these are just clay pieces, like relief on a wood background. And there's a pair of pieces here, which were probably the most successful of this period, really from 2018 to 2020. And I believe it was in 2019 I made this and the previous piece for this. It was a solo show that I got to have at the Jackson Hole Art Fair, which was a failed art fair. It only lasted for 1 year. But it was kind of fun to go out there and show this work and have no one show up to the art fair. But, sometimes it's just about making the work. Um, so these are always great because I have some idea in mind. Of course, it's one solid slab, have this whole design carved into it, and then things like to warp and change in the firing. And once I start putting it back on the board and trying to affix it, things start to look better when they're not lined up in the initial orientation that I had thought up. And so there's a little bit of the unknown working with pieces like this. And some of these little bits down here were actually left over from a different composition that I was able to grab and just kind of throw onto the board and finish the whole piece. Um, so this is really well, there's some more I did for a show a couple of years ago, but this is the wall hanging works that were much more sculptural, slab based. It was around 2015, because most of my training during undergrad and when I started throwing pots in high school, it was all wheel based and it was a lot of functional wear. So when I started my own studio and was working at the gallery and really trying to think about being a ceramic artist and what that means, um, I started moving away from the wheel and from functional forms and started working more with slabs and again trying to get stuff on the wall. But all the while, I was still kind of working with vessels on the side. In 2016, I actually was hired to design all the tableware for a chef's table at a fine dining restaurant in Santa Fe. And when I was doing that, I had this great moment where I'm sitting down with the chef and showing him all of these plates and everything that I had thrown. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, this is great. But you know what I really want? I want ovals." And I had never made an oval before in my life, but I told him, "I got you. Yeah, I can do ovals." And then proceeded to have to spend the next 2 months figuring out how to make a good oval plate that was easily reproducible. Um, so when I started my own studio, I was rethinking everything I knew about clay, and I had been trained in Japanese porcelain in my undergrad, and I had learned kind of Western throwing techniques and some different Eastern techniques from high school and into college. And when I started my studio, I kind of decided to just start fresh again. So I went back to just making pinch pots and altering them slightly on the wheel after they were pinched together. So this is one of those after just years of going back to the basics and rethinking my whole style, technique, approach to clay. And so I made this, and while I was doing pinch pots, I just loved the way that the clay would dry out, crack, and break, and my hands would kind of dry out, crack, and break in the exact same way. Um, so I had posted this picture online one day, and a friend of mine saw this and also had another friend doing like a quick little demo like workshop with Heidi Lowen in Santa Fe. And I had apprenticed with Heidi when I was 17, and she's really big on wall hanging bowls. So this friend of mine saw this pot, saw one of Heidi's pots, and calls me up and is like, I would really love to see this texture on the inside of a bowl. I want to commission you to do a whole set of these so we can have them in our house. And I was just like thrilled. That's great. I can totally do that. And then I started trying to actually make them. And it took a full 2 years of trial and error. to figure out how to make a bowl with cracks like this on the inside, all of this on the inside, because basically you have to make a bowl without touching the inside of the bowl. So it became kind of its own little Zen koan. And so after a couple years of trial and error with this, I was able to start making these wall hanging bowls. So this was from the first series. I started calling them Earth Portraits after the Roman idea of the Imago Clipeata, which were portraits that were painted on shields, which also influenced like early medallions and then coins. So this for me were little portraits of nature in this circular form. Um, and so this whole series, yeah, it was about 2020 when I first started getting any success with it. But it wasn't for another 2 years. I think it was 2022 when I was actually finally able to complete the commission for their house. There was so much. It's really difficult to ask the clay to crack and then have it stop cracking when you want it to stop cracking and not just be a broken piece. Um, so again, this is still kind of following in this idea of what does it mean to be broken, right? And being able to control broken and appreciate what's broken for its aesthetic qualities and not just throwing away the pot because it has a crack in it. And so this last piece here was really one of these dramatic moments when I opened the kiln and this thing was on top. And this was the last time I tried to use this technique with porcelain, because it really did not want to stay together. But this was just one of the more beautiful accidents that I'd had come out of this period of time, trying to get these broken pieces to stay together. And so finally, then I was able to finish the commission for my friend's house. So this is the grouping of bowls. This is 96 inches across. And you can see in the image on the left the three-dimensionality of these works a little bit floating off the wall. And so this then inspired a series of installations. So I put this together in 2022 at the gallery as kind of a trial run, and then had the wonderful opportunity to then do an installation at the Art on Paper Fair in New York later that year. And this was really big because this also shows the context that I was living in terms of the artists that we had at the gallery. So everything here on the back wall, well, this one, this one, this one, these are Raymond Johnson pieces. Great Johnson right here. Florence Miller Pierce, another Johnson. Bistrom, Emil Bistrom, co-founded the Transcendental Painting Group with Johnson in 1938, and this awesome little Wayne Thiebaud hanging out right there. So the geometry of the Johnsons really influenced how I was putting these together. Yeah, it was fairly successful, actually. A lot of people were very curious why there was a bunch of ceramic bowls on the wall at a paper fair. Anybody have any questions? All right, I'm gonna keep going on. So after that, really started circling back to this earlier style of doing the wall hanging relief sculpture, a little bit more refined in the geometry, and starting to incorporate then that broken texture into the geometric forms. Um, and this one was actually displayed. I did a show at WT before I was a student there, and I was a visiting artist before I came. So um, this was actually on display there. And what was different is I started blow torching the backgrounds of these. So it's actually burnt wood that's then stained. So I was trying to play again with more of that broken texture. And this was just fully deconstructed, broken slab. This was for a show I had at Fahrenheit Gallery right off the Santa Fe Plaza in 2023. And I was doing mostly bowls and experimenting with a lot of painting, and we'll get to the paintings in a little bit here. But my friend who got the show specifically asked me not to show any of my paintings. And so I hadn't done one of these wall reliefs for several years, and the show was the the motivation to get this whole new series together. And it was one of those moments where I had 5 weeks, I think, to do an entire exhibition's worth of work. And so I really just didn't leave my house for 5 weeks, and I was able to put together, I think, 11 of these large reliefs and a few prints. And so, um, again, incorporating that broken texture into the geometry and then the full broken form with the blowtorch burnt wood backgrounds and just getting a little bit more facility with this. I had decided that I was going to marble porcelain with white stoneware for these and did not think about how much that was going to warp the slabs when I actually finally got around to firing them. But of course, I was on time constraints, so I just had to roll with it. So when all of these came out of the kiln, they were so warped that there was no way to actually lay any part of it flat on the board to actually attach it and have big sections like some of the earlier pieces had. So these ones I was forced to break into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces to actually get them to lay flat enough to attach them to the board, which then created, of course, material challenge, but aesthetically, it became kind of this next level of broken, well beyond anything I had planned on. But you know, when you got a show, you just kind of got to do stuff. So this one also, I got a little overzealous with the blowtorch, but turned out to be one of the more successful works out of the show, just kind of burning the whole corner off that board, which played very nicely with the piece. So in this, this is what I was doing kind of ceramic wise, sculpturally. What you're not seeing is a lot of the functional wear and kind of the context of what I was doing based on the influence of the Transcendental Painting Group at the gallery, but also at this time, 2023. So during COVID, so that was 2021, I started doing my art history master's, and that was online. And I ended up writing my thesis on Kazimir Malejevich's Black Square and got absolutely obsessed with painting black squares. So starting in about 2022, I started painting these works. And as I started to learn more about the materiality and process in which he painted the suprematist works, I learned that in his black square, the whole thing was actually black and the white is on top of the black. So I started exploring that in my own works, and this just really simple geometry kind of took over my life for a number of years. And I was never really like I never really took painting classes or ever learned how to paint. But just being able to sit and spend days and days and days doing these thin washes, like I would do maybe 20, 25 thin washes of white on top of a black painting to build up this kind of luminous white, this glow on top of it. It was kind of this Zen approach to just creating art and connecting with this material that I really didn't know much about, and applying that kind of potter's stubbornness to painting. Um, so I also learned that just with really simple materials and ingredients in a painting, you can get a lot of variety. So just slightly changing the size of the square or the consistency of the paint, you can create a completely different work. Having different underpainting, adding some crackle into the work, and then just slightly offsetting the square, creates more of this Mondrian vibe. And one of the reasons I got into Malevich was while I was at the gallery, there were so many clients that would come through and they would talk about the Transcendental Painting Group almost as a way to justify their own spiritual philosophical beliefs. Like these artists agree with me. Um, but they kind of didn't really know what they were talking about. Like they hadn't really done the research, and so they're using these voices from history to just justify what they felt. And so I kind of decided that I was going to find out really where this movement came from. What started transcendental painting in the southwestern United States and geometric painting in general. And so I found my way back not to Kandinsky, but to Kazimir Malevich. And of course, Hilma af Klint, everybody wants to talk about her nowadays because she did predate everyone, but she was isolated. And the thing about Malevich is he was very much a part of the avant-garde scene in Russia. And all of this led to constructivism and what was going on in Russia. Then, like the Bauhaus was very much based on what was happening there. And then Raymond Johnson ends up meeting Laszlo Moholy-Nagy at the new Bauhaus in Chicago in 1937. So there's this kind of like direct connection from Malevich, who then visited the Bauhaus. They published one of his books. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was the editor of that book. And then Raymond Johnson from New Mexico ends up visiting him in Chicago, which then, of course, is where I was born. So I felt this kind of deep personal connection with this art and this lineage. And so that then sparked me to start painting suprematist works. Um, Simple color palette, except I decided to do it with tape, whereas they actually painstakingly painted every edge, which I just don't really have the patience for. Um, so these are some of these suprematist pieces that I was working on. This was all about 2023. I was painting all these and just kind of building my own vocabulary with painting. And now, of course, painting black squares and painting these where the white is on top of everything. And then also being a potter, that led me to doing these all white paintings. And these are actually done taping the canvas onto the pottery wheel, spinning it around and using a rib tool to create this circle right in the middle of the canvas. And then I would put about 50 or 60 layers of white wash on top of it to kind of create a relief out of the painted form. So it's always interesting as it slowly changes from being this colorful image, and we'll get to one that doesn't have the white in a second here, but then becomes almost relief sculpture once enough washes are layered on top of it. And again, like something very simple can be very complicated and have a lot of depth and detail. And so on this one, you can see some of that underpainting coming through. Um, and yeah, I'm playing a little bit more. Anybody who's ever sat down on a pottery wheel has probably seen that on the inside of a bowl. Um, and then this is I finally decided to skip the whitewashing, right? And so this is actually what's underneath all of those white paintings. And so this was kind of me finally getting to a point where I was comfortable enough with the process and myself as a painter and just who I am as a person to kind of have color and make something that was bright and not this like forced, subdued expression. And that then led very naturally into painting ensos, which are these Zen circles of enlightenment that Zen masters in Japan have been painting for some 400 or 500 years. They do it all freehand, but again, I'm a potter, so I just put this on the wheel and spin it around and make a circle, right? And here I'm using crackle paste to connect to what I was doing with pottery at the time on the earth portraits in those bowls. Some of them are smooth, but this one also building up a lot of texture in the background. And, again, really simple elements, just black, gold, and red in different combinations. Um, so this is pretty much where I left off before coming to WT and starting this graduate program. I had a fair amount of success. Of course, it was kind of funny. I showed these last three paintings at a ceramics show right before I left, and I didn't sell any ceramics, but I managed to sell paintings at a ceramics show. And and over the years, I've never really had much success with my my sculptural clay works. And I've ended up selling prints and selling paintings, and a lot of people have wanted functional wear, but the sculptural works never really took off. So I've constantly had to kind of go back and reevaluate what I'm doing, come up with new ideas. It's not like commercial success is the end all be all, but I was trying to survive by being an artist and selling my work. So it was constantly something that I was struggling with. And one of the reasons I wanted to come to WT and finally get a master's in art, some piece of paper saying that I know what I'm doing, was to kind of get a breather from all of that and to be able to focus on just kind of just cooking and seeing what comes up when I didn't have to try to survive and worry about how I was going to pay rent and feed myself. So from here, I got to WT, and these are the pieces that are up at Highlands right now. And so John Rivette, who I was actually friends with before I came out here, was just right off the bat like, don't like, I don't want to see you doing any of the stuff that you were doing before. So, and really pushed me to start incorporating more color and movement and chaos into my works. So this series came out of that last semester, and then the kitchen sink series, which I just painted to death. I mean, there's 4 or 5 different paintings under here, um, and just every different idea I could come up with. I guess everything except for taping them to a pottery wheel and putting circles on them that way. So something about having a pottery studio now separate from a painting studio has allowed me to focus more on painting as a separate art form rather than just relying on my skills as a potter or the tools of pottery to create different forms. So last semester I was also um, a little it was a little chaotic settling into the studio here. I was so used to having my own space all the time, being able to do whatever I want, and all of a sudden I was in a shared space and had to navigate firings with other people. And oh, well, I've got a raised hand. Did you mean to raise your hand? I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
This is
there we go.
Rhiannon. Sorry, this is Rhiannon
Hi.
Chat. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, hi. Um, yeah, I just had a couple of questions before you go a little further.
hmm
Um, First of all, I think I might have missed it in terms of what were you using to adhere the broken pieces of ceramic to those charred boards?
I was using E6000.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that. Got it.
Yeah. And
Okay.
yeah, a big part of that was because Florence Miller Pierce's work I was familiar with, and they're so fragile. Like if they freeze or heat up too much, they just shatter. And
Mm,
like, okay, I need something that's going to stay flexible, that'll be freeze proof, melt proof, but also has really strong fumes. So yeah, that.
mm. Yeah, I'm familiar with those fumes. Okay, and I mean this could be something that you might want to address later on in your talk, but one of the things that I was curious about is that you and I actually have a similar aesthetic in terms of this interest in the broken, in the fragmented, and this charred surface, and this sort of surface that has undergone and is showing the effects of some sort of deconstruction or defects or these types of things. So in terms of a visual language, right, building that as a visual language, I went through my own process recently in grad school where I have always been attracted to these aesthetics, the rusted, the falling apart, and these types of things. And I came to conclusions about what that meant for me in terms of foundational or fundamental conceptual through lines for the
Mhm.
work. And so I was kind of curious if you, in your grad program now or through the time of working in this sort of way, have come to your own sort of conclusions about what those surfaces mean for you in terms of what they're
Mhm.
communicating, or what has caused you to become attracted to them, because as outside of what you've already explained in terms of their compositional forms and the aesthetic like attraction that people have for them.
Yeah, no, I very much appreciate that question. Uh, I tend to, when I'm thinking about things, just focus on the formal and like kind of the surface of things. But a big part of the broken surface was during that time when I started encountering that in my own work. Um, I had, I was kind of messing up my life fairly actively, and I was going through a lot of personal issues. And I had been very successful with a lot of things when I was younger. And like when I first started training martial arts, like I was the national champion by the time I was 12. And I was like performing in dance. And when I first started doing clay, like everybody was like, there was just a lot of support in my life. And then it was really around like 2013, 2014. It was kind of like the bottom dropped out. And like my behavior went from being kind of young antics to just being actively toxic. And I was kind of um, making some poor decisions. And so as I was looking at this, and it was noticing like that broken wasn't necessarily bad. And so working with that surface and working with the quote unquote like faults or like defects in a broken piece kind of gave me like a personal context for appreciating those aspects of myself that I didn't really know how to deal with. And so in being able to see the broken vessels as beautiful, I was able to see myself that way too. And so, since then, it's been about 5 years now that I've been sober and like straightened myself out, and I still carry that, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like putting the pieces back together. I mean, the breaks are still there; you can still see it. But now the finish is, I'm looking at it from a different context rather than being in it. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, does that somewhat answer your question?
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's very personal, and thank you for sharing that. And I like what you said in terms of the broken not being bad, because it's an interesting phenomenon that you experience not only in terms of your own aesthetic reaction, preferring, right, these things that were broken, being attracted to them versus the vessel that was pristine, right? Um, but that it also held like sort of widespread appeal because you were selling those works,
Mm-hmm.
right? No, it's just an interesting phenomenon because I know that there has been this, long sort of standing conversation in my own grad program about getting more and more personal or being more vulnerable in order to tap into something that actually ends up becoming a universal.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's exactly what's happening here. And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of wabi sabi,
Yeah.
this aesthetic of the imperfect being the thing that's actually more sought after. And it probably is some sort of reference to ourselves and understanding of our flawed human nature that we respond to that. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. And that really is like the arc of it, right? I spent so many years, especially while I was in the porcelain program, learning how to make that perfect bowl with the right, translucency, and it referenced what my teachers were teaching and what their teachers taught, and like I got it, I had nailed it. But it wasn't really me, and finding space in my life to appreciate the off-centered, and nowadays I don't even throw pots anymore. I make pinch pots and I clean them up on the wheel. And like I was just in the studio earlier today just making pinch pots, and there's so much joy for me in that process of not knowing how it's going to come out and having it crack and break, and celebrating the individuality of each piece, not because it's perfect but because it's imperfect. That's really it's really important to me right now, so it's not that I'm necessarily at the end of the story arc of the beauty of broken things. It's just at a different context of my life. Having gone through all that, I live my life in a very particular way now, and these works like this one right here is kind of a more mature expression of that. And like I said, I was in this new studio, this new context. I lived in Santa Fe. Pretty much my family moved there when I was 6 years old, took a vacation, never went home. And I was in New Mexico then for 32 years and I could never quite get out. So moving here was me finally getting out and just cut all ties, quit my job. I lived in my apartment for 12 years. Like I was comfortable. So I got out and I was very uncomfortable last semester. And so this series of forms here was kind of working that out, using a lot of blow torches on the clay, breaking it, stacking it together. I was always really attracted to the stacks that Peter Volkus did, kind of his later career works. But then also Japanese pottery, Hamada Shoji was always really interesting for me, and looking at more contemporary potters doing what is it, Koroniki. So Akira Satake does some wonderful works. So these ones are all kind of referencing that, and they're very large. The last one's 32 inches. This is actually, I have a 35. This is also 32 inches and heavy. They're like 50, 60 pounds. I never quite been able to work that big. Like I had small kilns at home. So it was nice. I hadn't been able to do a gas firing for about 15 years before I got here. So it was great to be able to get some actual fire on these works. Um, and kind of going to not necessarily a familiar vocabulary, but one of my favorite books is, classic Shino and Aribe ceramics from Japan. So I decided to go with Shino and Aribe last semester for all the works that I was doing. And this was the biggest one I was able to pull off, which is 42 inches, which was technically a challenge for me, but I was able to do that. And after working with these big pieces and being super annoyed by how much of a pain they were to move around, I started focusing in more on sculptural vessels. Again, still breaking, tearing, even taking like a palette knife and chiseling these pieces once they were dry. So working with a lot of different hardnesses in the clay, working with it at kind of every different state. Um, Again, just Shino Aribe, keeping it simple to start with. Um, and I didn't intend for these to be so floral, but once I threw them all together, I found out that it turns out I'm making flowers. Um, so this kind of then comes to this piece, which was my absolute favorite that I made. It was the first of all of them, one of those happy accidents. I'll probably never be able to reproduce this one. This is, you guys have this one right now. But this again kind of sparked uh, a new direction for me. Um, yeah. And so out of that came this piece and the next one, which are also in the show, um, which was coming back to those wall reliefs, but then taking the wall relief off the wall and allowing it to be a freestanding vessel. So really putting everything that I had done over the past 10 years with different broken textures, the same texture that I was putting on the insides of my bowls, the geometric forms that I had learned from my master's thesis with the obvious big square references and also circle, square, triangle. So now we're looking at Kandinsky, which also shows up a lot in Raymond Johnson's work and the Transcendental Painting Group. This one, of course, then being a transcendental signpost was a very direct reference to them. For me, kind of imagining this kind of ambiguous form at some sort of metaphysical crossroads, which is not some sort, I mean, it's literally where I'm finding myself right now, what directions to take in life. And yeah, so we've got these, and then real quick, this is what I'm working on right now. This one I'm just waiting to frame. So really working to combine all the different elements that I've picked up over the years and the new things that I'm working on here in the studio. And ceramic wise, I'm now working on these forms, tying together those transcendental signposts with my totemic forms. And these are heavily influenced by a quote from Satsuya Nagi's Unknown Craftsman. which is quoted by Bernard Leach in a Potter's book in the, what is it, towards the standard section, where they're talking about these shrines littered throughout rural Japan that are dedicated to the millions of unknown souls. Um, so I started imagining these as somewhat signposts, but also shrines to all of the unknown people who have passed. Um, and maybe almost like a halfway house for lost, or not lost, I don't like lost, but wandering souls. Um, so yeah, still trying to pull all the pieces together and tie these threads together in different ways. And so yeah, this is just a shot from the other day in the studio. So that kind of concludes the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And now we'll take some questions if anyone has questions. Do you have anything, Todd?
Yeah, in a lot of your early work, most of it is black and white, and now you've done some things that are color. Can you talk more about maybe how you feel about color versus then versus moving forward?
Yeah, I have never had a great color sense. Um, I've been around a lot of different artists and just different people who just kind of magically throw things together and they look good. And I am not one of those people. So I've kind of played it safe over the years. And while I was working with porcelain, it was very easily just having this clean white surface. I was playing with Gosu blue underglaze painting for a while in my undergrad. And when I started my own studio, I decided to shift to just black and white. And that was also influenced by Jun Kaneko's work, although he's got a lot more cobalt in his black than I do. Um, but that was in large part with the clay was just to allow the clay to be clay and not have clay be a surface for glaze. And I just happened to be using white clay. And it really became a comfort zone for me. And over the years, it was like, experiment a little bit here and there, but I never knew color theory. Nobody ever taught me that. I didn't know how to mix paints properly. So now that I'm here, pursuing a master's, John right off the bat was just like, no, we need color in your work. You have to do this. And then they threw me in an intro to art class, and I literally had to teach color theory. So I really quickly had to educate myself. And so within, the past semester and a half, I finally got that education that I was lacking. And so I still feel like it's like baby steps, and I'm doing very simple things, just like warm, cool colors. I taught a whole class yesterday on how to get chromatic grays by mixing complements, which I didn't even know you could do until a couple months ago. Um, so it's kind of a steep learning curve right now, but I'm really trying to break away. I mean, I still dress in black all the time because it's just, easy. But that was the problem, is it was just too easy for me to fall into that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, can you maybe project where you might go with that in the future?
Um, there is this Franz Marc painting. I believe it's of a horse, and it's like literally has every color in it, and yet it works. Um, I kind of dream of being able to pull that off someday, and being able to have that facility with color, where I can just kind of be mixing on the fly and have it make sense, like have it an active part of my vocabulary. Um, but I also do prefer minimal color palettes. One of my favorite pieces is this Gray Run series that Hilary Heiler did, and it's all just gray with two little spots of red. And those little bits of red just pop with that background. So right now I'm a little bit in between this admiration for control over color, and being able to gain some sense of mastery over that, which is part of the reason why I've been pursuing landscape painting, is because it's a great way to develop that skill. But my own personal aesthetic is probably a little bit more subdued of a palette with monochrome and just some pops of contrast or complement. But for right now, I kind of just got to be a student and do the things that are uncomfortable. So color is still uncomfortable for me. Yeah. Does that cover it?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool.
I have a question. Would you consider changing up your clothing? To what color it is?
I have been a little bit. I've got some blue shirts now. You caught me in all black today, so I backslid just a little bit. But yes, I have been trying to expand my boundaries. Like I bought a thermos the other day and I bought a yellow one, which I thought was pretty adventurous for me.
Honestly, one of my sayings is my body is my canvas.
Hmm.
And I always say, another thing that I say is everything's already broken. So brokenness with your work resonates with me, but you could step it up with your body being your canvas. Just saying.
I like that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And next time you're in Vegas, you can look in my closet. I've got lots of choices.
All right, all right. That's a deal.
So now that you've started these couple of shrine pieces, are you enjoying that idea enough that you're gonna pursue that through multiple iterations?
Yeah, that's one of the wonderful things about the potter's brain, and I know it's not just for pottery people, but like I'm always thinking in series and like you've got to make hundreds of things before you know if it's good or bad. So with these, that idea of them littering the countryside, like I'm dreaming of being able to make enough that I could actually put together my own pilgrimage path and like have a little map that you could follow to find all of these pieces actually existing in nature. Um, if I can actually pull that off, like, get the right permits to be able to install these, maybe in the canyon, who knows where. But that's kind of what I'm imagining, what I'm dreaming of for these pieces is to be able to have, at minimum, I need to make 20 of them before I know if it's a viable kind of thing. So at least for this semester and the summer, this is what I'm going to be focused in on until I find the next thing.
Okay,
Yes.
well, thank you, Matthew. That was very interesting, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right.
Yeah, it's really fun to see your work, more of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I had so much fun
Yeah.
being there with everybody. It's such a wonderful group. It's nice to hear everybody's voices again.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Very thoughtful.